An indefinite suspension just hit an NFL front office, and the league is asking serious questions. Ryan Gold, the Cardinals' director of college scouting, is banned after allegations of leaking draft secrets and betting on football. But how did a trusted evaluator end up in the middle of an NFL gambling scandal? Let's break down what the phone call revealed that changed everything. Friday afternoon, right before training camps opened across the NFL, the league dropped a statement that stopped scrolling thumbs across the country. The NFL suspended Arizona Cardinals personnel executive Ryan Gold indefinitely for violating the league's gambling policy. No warning, no rumors circulating beforehand. Just a name most casual fans had never heard, attached to a punishment usually reserved for players caught fixing games. The details that came out were worse than a routine violation. The league said its investigation determined that Gold provided confidential, non-public inside information regarding 2026 draft selections by the Cardinals before the picks were announced. And Gold also participated in parlay bets on NFL and college games. Two violations, not one. He didn't just place a few bets on the side. He gave away the Cardinals draft board before the world ever saw it, and he bet on the very games his employer was invested in. The league wouldn't name who got that information. The league didn't say who Gold had provided with the information. That silence is its own kind of alarm bell inside NFL circles, because it means somebody out there, a bookmaker, a bettor, a middleman, had Arizona's card before Adam Schefter or Rob Maaddi ever tweeted a pick. The NFL's statement leaned hard on the seriousness of the breach while trying to calm fears about the games themselves. The gambling policy, which is annually reviewed with all NFL personnel, strictly prohibits anyone in the NFL from participating in or facilitating any form of sports gambling, and from providing third parties non-public information, the NFL said. Adding that although there is no reason to believe the integrity of any NFL game was affected, the league takes any violation of the gambling policy with the utmost seriousness. That line about game integrity was meant to be reassuring. For a lot of people around the league, it did the opposite. If a scouting director could sell out draft intel without anyone in the building noticing, what else could slip through? The timing made it sting even more. Camps were about to open. The NFL's policies and expectations for all employees are clear, comprehensive, and consistently communicated, the Cardinals said, adding that the decision involves a single employee and that their focus remains on preparing for the start of training camp next week and the 2026 season. That's the corporate version of please look away from this. But nobody was looking away. Inside league circles, comparisons started almost immediately to the last time the NFL swung this hard. At least 15 players have been suspended by the league for gambling violations since 1963, including several in recent years, but none since Isaiah Rodgers, who was suspended in June 2023, but reinstated in April 2024. Rodgers was a cornerback who bet on his own team's games and got a full season away from football. Gold isn't a player, but the punishment mirrors that exact severity. Indefinite, immediate, and career-threatening. What made scouts and personnel people around the league uneasy wasn't just the punishment. It was the position. Gold wasn't some low-level analyst nobody trusted with sensitive information. Arizona Cardinals director of college scouting Ryan Gold has been suspended indefinitely for violating the NFL gambling policy by sharing inside information about 2026 NFL draft picks. That's the job that decides who gets drafted, who a team builds its roster around, who becomes a face of the franchise. That's about as close to the inner sanctum as it gets without being the general manager himself. Players who'd been picked because of work Gold had a hand in were suddenly attached to a scandal they had nothing to do with. The Cardinals' most recent draft class, the one Gold's department had just finished evaluating, became an uncomfortable footnote to the story. Arizona made 7 picks in the 2026 draft, kicking things off with the splashy selection of running back Jeremiah Love, and also picked quarterback Carson Beck in the 3rd round, in another somewhat surprising choice. Those names, the ones Gold's scouting reports helped bring into the building, were now tied, fairly or not, to a gambling investigation before they'd even played a snap in pads for their new team. And it wasn't just this year's class. Gold had a real footprint on the roster already walking around the Cardinals facility. While Arizona hasn't drafted all that well in recent years, Gold played a role in helping the team hit on picks like Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr., 2 names that Cardinals fans actually like. 2 players who owe part of their NFL careers to evaluations Gold made. Now every one of those picks gets a second look, a little bit of side eye, because the guy who helped find them just got run out of the building for selling secrets. That's the part that had players around the league talking in group chats and locker rooms, not just Cardinals players, but guys around the NFL who know how scouting departments work. If it can happen in Arizona's draft room, it can happen in theirs. To understand how shocking this suspension felt inside the building, you have to understand how long Gould had actually been part of it. This wasn't some outside hire who'd been with the Cardinals for a season and a half. He joined the Cardinals front office in 2014 as a scouting assistant and moved up the ranks in the years since. That's over a decade of institutional trust, built one draft class at a time. The climb wasn't quick, and it wasn't handed to him. Gould was in his 13th season with the Cardinals and was promoted to his current position as Director of College Football Scouting in June 2025. Previously, he served as a college scouting coordinator with the team from 2018 to 2021, and then as their Assistant Director of College Scouting from 2022 to 2024. Coordinator, then Assistant Director, then Director. Every rung of that ladder required someone above him signing off, vouching for him, trusting him with more sensitive material each time. By the time he got the top job in college scouting, he wasn't just evaluating tape. As Director of College Scouting, the team described Gould's role as overseeing the day-to-day operation and organization of the Cardinals' college scouting department. He ran meetings, he built draft boards. He had access to information that literally moves NFL futures markets and shapes how gamblers set odds months in advance. That's what makes the betrayal, and around the league, that's the word being used in private conversations, land differently than a typical rules violation. He wasn't some rookie staffer who didn't know the rules. With gambling, sports betting in particular, becoming so popular in recent years, the NFL has cracked down on players, coaches, and executives with strict guidelines that must be adhered to, and Gould's indefinite suspension indicates that he flagrantly violated the policy. He knew exactly what the gambling policy said because he'd sat through the same annual briefings every person in the building sits through. The NFL made that point explicit in its own statement. The NFL has strict gambling policies for players, club, and league personnel. And the league has also dedicated significant resources to its gambling education program, reaching more than 20,000 people associated with the league. 20,000 people getting the same training. Gould was one of them year after year, and he still crossed the line. What's staggering to people who've worked in front offices is how much damage a single person in that seat can do without ever touching a football. The NFL operates on the principle of competitive integrity, and draft information is among the league's most closely guarded assets, capable of influencing betting markets, trade negotiations, and competitive strategy. Every front office employee is trusted to protect that information, and when that trust is broken, it affects far more than one individual. A scouting director doesn't need to throw a game to shake the sport's foundation. He just needs to pick up a phone before a pick gets announced. That's exactly what investigators say happened. The league didn't stumble onto this by accident either. This was built on paper trails. The NFL's review included interviews with relevant people and an examination of electronic records, texts, calls, betting slips, whatever digital trail Gould left behind, while he was allegedly funneling picks out the back door. Someone in the league's investigations unit pulled all of it together into a case solid enough to hand down an indefinite ban without hesitation. And that unresolved question kept nagging at people around the league. Who got the tip? The statement does not specifically say who Gould provided information about draft picks to, but considering it is mentioned in a statement about a gambling policy violation, it is certainly implied that those who received the information used it for their benefit. Somewhere out there, someone made money, or at least tried to, off information that should have stayed locked inside a war room in Tempe. That name still hasn't surfaced publicly, and until it does, the story stays half-finished. For players who built relationships with Gould over the years, guys who sat across from him during pre-draft visits, prospects who got calls from him during the process, veterans who talked shop with him in the hallway, the fall felt personal in a way league suspensions rarely do. He wasn't a stranger in a suit, he was a guy they'd known. The NFL doesn't suspend a 13-year employee on a hunch. Something specific triggered this, and the mechanics of how a gambling violation like this gets uncovered say a lot about how seriously the league treats its integrity systems now, compared to even a few years ago. Start with what NFL personnel are and aren't allowed to do, because the rules aren't the same for everyone in the building. NFL players, but not league or club staff, are allowed to legally place bets on other sports as long as they are off club property and are not traveling with the team, and they also are allowed to take part in traditional fantasy football leagues with limited prize money and legally gamble at casinos on personal time. Players get some room to breathe. Front office staff like Gold get none. Zero tolerance. Full stop. No personal time carve-out. The specific line Gold crossed wasn't ambiguous either. The policy bars anyone from attempting to manipulate any play or other aspect of an NFL game, and separately bars sharing confidential, non-public information regarding any NFL game, player, or event with any third party. Two separate prohibited categories, and by the league's own account, Gold hit both. The betting and the leaking. Here's the strange part that even league insiders admitted they couldn't fully explain. Nobody said publicly how the investigation actually started. It is unclear how the NFL knew to begin investigating Gold. Sportsbooks sometimes flag unusual betting patterns and alert leagues. Sometimes it's a tip from inside a building. Sometimes it's a jilted associate turning on someone. The NFL isn't saying which one it was this time, and that mystery is part of what's kept the story alive in league circles all week. What the league did make clear is that the fallout stopped at Gold's desk. The NFL said the Cardinals fully cooperated, and the league has seen no indication that any other member of the organization, coach, or player was aware of or involved in this activity, and there was no indication that any play or game was affected by this activity. That's the sentence the Cardinals wanted printed in bold. One bad actor contained, no spread across the locker room. Still, contained doesn't mean painless. Even with players cleared of any knowledge, the optics of a scouting director leaking draft intel land differently for a franchise that just went through a leadership shakeup. Arizona owner Michael Bidwill spoke to the press from the training center in Tempe after the decision to fire head coach Jonathan Gannon. New GM, new head coach, new era being sold to a rebuilding fan base. And now a gambling scandal breaking out of the same scouting department. That's supposed to be laying the foundation for that rebuild. The people now steering that rebuild had to answer for a mess they didn't create. Arizona General Manager Monty Ossenfort and head coach Mike LaFleur speak during a press conference at the Arizona Cardinals facility in Tempe after the first round of the NFL draft. Ossenfort and LaFleur are the two names now steering the Cardinals through training camp, and neither one signed up to spend the first week of practice fielding questions about a scandal that predates their tenure by exactly 0 seasons. This happened on their watch, in their building, from someone on their staff. The league's investigative muscle has clearly been flexed before, just not against front office personnel in this specific way. The last time this magnitude of punishment came down, it was aimed at a player, not an executive. Gold's ban is the first time the league has handed down discipline for violating its gambling policy since it suspended then Colts cornerback Isaiah Rodgers indefinitely in June 2023, and the league reinstated Rodgers in April 2024. Rodgers came back after about 10 months. Whether Gold gets anything close to that runway is still unknown, but the precedent tells you the league does reinstate people, eventually, if the appeal process and internal review go a certain way. That right to appeal is already on the table. Gold can appeal the suspension, according to the league. Nobody expects a quick resolution. These processes tend to stretch across months, sometimes into the following offseason, and Gold's camp hasn't tipped its hand on strategy yet. One thing that hasn't happened: any word from Gold himself. He couldn't immediately be reached for comment. Silence from the center of the story only feeds the speculation swirling everywhere else about who he talked to, what he was actually thinking, and whether there's more the league hasn't disclosed yet. News like this doesn't stay contained to one scouting department. It moves through every building in the league within hours, because every team has a version of Gold's job, and every player understands, at some level, how much power that role carries over their own careers. Start with the fans, because their reaction set the tone before players even had a chance to weigh in publicly. Within minutes of the news breaking, social media filled with a familiar theme: not outrage over one executive's actions, but frustration that the Cardinals once again found themselves making headlines for the wrong reasons, reflecting years of accumulated disappointment from a fan base that feels its franchise never escapes controversy. That's not shock about gambling policy. That's exhaustion from people who've watched this organization stumble through one distraction after another. The criticism didn't stay confined to football decisions either. The criticism stretched far beyond football operations. with many supporters questioning the organization's leadership and arguing that repeated off-field issues have become part of the Cardinals' identity. That's a brutal thing to hear about your own franchise, and it's exactly the sentiment that spread into how players and league personnel elsewhere were framing the story too. Less about one man's mistake, more about what it says about oversight. At every level of an organization, local coverage in Arizona picked up on how deep that fatigue runs. Organizational credibility isn't rebuilt solely through draft picks and player development. It's rebuilt through consistency, accountability, and long stretches without self-inflicted setbacks. That's the kind of line that gets repeated in team meetings and player interviews alike. Because every guy in that locker room knows a scandal like this becomes the story instead of the season. Around the rest of the NFL, other franchises' scouting departments went quiet in a different way. Not public statements, but internal ones. Teams reviewing their own protocols, checking who has access to draft boards before picks go public, reminding staff about the same gambling briefings Gold sat through for over a decade. Nobody wants to be the next building, explaining to reporters how this slipped through. For players specifically, the anxiety isn't really about Gold as a person. It's about what his case proves is possible. If a director of college scouting can leak information about incoming rookies before anyone knows their names, what happens with information about existing players, injury reports, personnel decisions, trade conversations? The NFL's statement tried to draw a hard line around draft-only exposure, but players talk, and the conversation in league circles has stretched well past just draft security. There's also a quieter unease among veterans who'd been personally scouted by Gold over the years. Guys brought in for private workouts, prospects who fielded calls from him. During the pre-draft process, players who owe part of their NFL trajectory to evaluations he made. Gold played a role in helping the team hit on picks like Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. These two are now playing out their careers under a Cardinals uniform tied, at least by name association, to a scandal neither one had anything to do with. The rookies drafted in the very class Gold allegedly compromised face a different kind of discomfort. Nobody's accusing Jeremiah Love or Carson Beck of anything. The league was explicit that no player was implicated, but walking into a new locker room with your draft class attached to a gambling investigation isn't the welcome any rookie pictures for himself. Analysts and former players weighing in publicly leaned into how unusual this specific combination of violations really is. Betting on games is one thing the league has punished before. Leaking draft information for someone else's benefit is something else entirely. And combining both in one case is close to unprecedented outside of the Rodgers situation, which only involved the betting half. That's part of why league observers keep calling this one of the more serious gambling cases the NFL has handled in years, not because of the dollar amounts involved, which haven't been disclosed, but because of what kind of information got out and how long it appears to have been happening under everyone's nose. The Cardinals tried to draw a firm line under the whole situation with their public response, insisting this was isolated. The NFL's policies and expectations for all employees are clear, comprehensive, and consistently communicated, the Cardinals said in their statement. We fully support the league's decision in this matter, which involves a single employee. Our focus remains on preparing for the start of training camp next week and the 2026 season. That's the corporate version of moving on. Whether the locker room actually moves on that easily is a different question entirely. Training camp opened anyway. Football doesn't wait for scandals to resolve themselves, and the Cardinals had a roster to build regardless of what happened in the scouting department. But the story didn't disappear just because the practice fields opened. Gold's immediate future is genuinely uncertain. An indefinite suspension isn't a fixed sentence, it's a question mark that stays open until the league decides otherwise, or until an appeal changes the outcome. You can never say never in the NFL, but things certainly don't look good for Gold right now. That's about as blunt as league coverage gets on a guy's career prospects. There's real weight behind that pessimism. 13 years of building trust inside one organization gone in a single afternoon. Unfortunately, his time with Arizona and the NFL as a whole could very well be over. Front offices talk to each other. Even if Gold eventually wins an appeal or gets reinstated down the line the way Rodgers did, the number of teams willing to hand him the same level of trust again is a real question nobody can answer yet. The Cardinals, meanwhile, have to move forward without the guy who ran their college scouting department, heading into a season where the roster is still very much under construction. The Arizona Cardinals have torn things down this offseason, embracing a rebuild after several years of mediocrity, and while the team hasn't aggressively added to its roster, there are still some talented players on both sides of the ball. Though it'd be a shock if the Cardinals end up even being a playoff threat in 2026. A rebuild already facing long odds now has to replace one of its key evaluators in the middle of the process. That's not the only headache the front office is juggling right now either. Arizona has other problems it still has to deal with too. Most importantly, it needs to get Jacoby Brissett's contract situation resolved, as he could very well hold out once training camp gets underway. A quarterback situation still unsettled, a scouting department missing its director, and a fan base already running low on patience. That's the environment this suspension dropped into around the league. The bigger question lingers past this one team. If the NFL's gambling education program reaches over 20,000 people every year and someone still slipped through with over a decade of institutional access, what does that say about how enforceable these policies really are at scale? The league's answer, for now, is the same answer it always gives: that the system worked, that the investigation caught the violation, that the punishment sends the necessary message, although there is no reason to believe the integrity of any NFL game was affected. The league takes any violation of the gambling policy with the utmost seriousness. Whether that message actually changes behavior in other front offices remains to be seen. Rodgers' case didn't stop this one from happening 2 years later. The NFL will keep pointing to strict punishment as its deterrent. And for now, that's the only mechanism it has. What's left is a career in limbo, a franchise trying to keep its rebuild on schedule, and a league still holding on to the identity of whoever received that leaked information. A name that, if it ever surfaces, could reopen this entire story in a way nobody in Arizona wants to relive. Gold's appeal process moves forward quietly, out of public view, while training camp cameras roll on a roster full of players who had nothing to do with any of it, carrying a scandal's shadow into a season the Cardinals can't afford to lose more time on. For now, the suspension stands, indefinite, unresolved, and still sending ripples through a league that had already seen its version of this story play out once before.